"You are not on the list, Mom." Those 7 words were spoken so calmly that for a second I thought I had imagined them. I was standing at the entrance of my grandson's wedding, surrounded by white roses, soft violin music, and more than 200 well-dressed guests, when my own son stepped in front of me and blocked my way. My name is Evelyn Moore. I was 71 years old that day, a widow, a grandmother, and until that moment, I believed I was still part of my family. I had spent the entire morning getting ready, not out of vanity, but out of respect. Respect for the day. Respect for my grandson Daniel, who I had helped raise when his parents were too busy building their lives. Respect for myself. I chose a navy blue silk dress I had saved for a special occasion, fastened the pearl brooch that once belonged to my mother, and sprayed a light touch of perfume my late husband used to say smelled like confidence. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought, you still belong somewhere. The drive to the venue felt hopeful. The desert sun was warm but gentle, the kind of Arizona morning that makes everything feel possible. The driver smiled at me and said, "Big celebration today." I smiled back and said, "Yes. My grandson's wedding. I am very proud of him." When we arrived, the venue took my breath away. Tall white arches, crystal glasses catching the light, guests laughing, hugging, taking photos. It was beautiful, exactly as planned. People I recognized waved at me. Some complimented the decorations. One woman said, "This wedding is stunning. Whoever organized it did an amazing job." I thanked her quietly. I walked toward the entrance where my son, Thomas, and his wife, Lauren, were greeting guests. Thomas looked sharp in his tailored suit. Lauren was glowing, dressed elegantly, smiling at everyone. For a brief moment, my heart softened. This was my family. This was why I had done everything. I stepped forward. Thomas did not hug me. Instead, he raised his hand slightly, as if stopping traffic. His expression was cold, almost rehearsed. Lauren suddenly became very interested in adjusting the flowers beside her. "Mum," Thomas said, lowering his voice but not enough to hide it. "What are you doing here?" I laughed nervously. "What do you mean? I am here for Daniel's wedding." He turned to the young woman holding the guest list, took it from her hands, and flipped through it slowly. The music behind me seemed to fade. Conversations quieted. I could feel eyes turning in our direction. He stopped, looked up at me, and said clearly, "Your name is not on the list." The words hit me harder than any slap ever could. I felt the blood drain from my face. For a moment, I could not breathe. Surely this was a mistake. I had reviewed the invitations myself. I had paid for every detail. I looked at Lauren, searching for some sign of confusion or embarrassment. She did not look back. She smiled faintly. People were staring now. I heard someone gasp. I heard whispers. I stood there, frozen, realizing that in front of everyone I knew, I had just been erased. And in that moment, standing beneath the arch I had paid for, I understood something I had refused to see for years. To them, I was not family. I was just the wallet they had finally decided to close. 7 months earlier, my life had quietly begun revolving around that wedding. It started with a visit on a Sunday afternoon. Thomas and Lauren sat across from me in my living room, their hands wrapped around the coffee cups I had poured for them. They spoke softly, carefully, the way people do when they are about to ask for something large. "Mum," Thomas said, "you know how expensive things are these days." Lauren sighed, pressing her lips together. "We just want Daniel to have the kind of wedding he deserves. Something special, something memorable." I remember smiling, because in my mind, this was what family did. You showed up. You helped when you could. After my husband passed away, I had promised myself that if I ever had the means, I would make life easier for the people I loved. How much does a wedding like that cost? I asked. Lauren pulled out a glossy brochure. The venue looked like something from a magazine. Elegant gardens, chandeliers, a sunset view over the desert. The catering menu included items I had only ever ordered once in my life. The dress alone cost more than the car I drove. I should have hesitated. I should have asked questions. Instead, I said, "If this is what Daniel wants, we will make it work." From that moment on, I became the quiet engine behind everything. I met with vendors. I reviewed contracts. I transferred deposits. Every signature was mine. Every payment came from my account. I did not complain. I did not ask for recognition. I told myself that love did not need applause. Over time, I noticed small things that made me uncomfortable. Thomas and Lauren never asked how I was. They only asked if a payment had gone through. When I suggested something practical, like reducing the guest list or choosing a simpler menu, Lauren would smile politely and say, "Oh, that would not photograph well." They began speaking to me differently, less like a mother, more like a resource. Lauren would text late at night asking me to cover an unexpected expense, followed by a heart emoji. Thomas would say, "Just this once, Mum. We will figure it out later." Later never came. When the invitations were being finalized, I sat with Lauren at my dining table. We went through names line by line. Family, friends, distant relatives. I made sure no one was forgotten. I remember pointing to my own name on the list and laughing, saying, "I suppose I should be invited too." Lauren laughed with me. Or at least, I thought she did. As the months passed, the total climbed higher than I had expected. Over $100,000. Money my husband had left behind so I could live comfortably and safely in my later years. I told myself it was worth it. That this was what it meant to be a good mother, a good grandmother. What I did not realize was that with every check I signed, I was teaching them something. I was teaching them that my boundaries did not matter. I was teaching them that my presence was optional, but my money was not. And by the time the wedding day arrived, they had already decided which one of those they needed, and which one they could do without. I did not argue with my son at the entrance. I did not raise my voice or ask anyone to defend me. Something in me went very still, the way a lake does right before a storm. I straightened my shoulders, adjusted the pearl brooch on my dress, and looked Thomas in the eyes one last time. "All right," I said quietly. "If that is how it is, I will not make a scene." He did not respond. Lauren did not look at me. The young woman with the guest list avoided my gaze as if I were contagious. I turned around and walked away. The path back through the garden felt longer than when I had arrived. Guests stepped aside as I passed, pretending not to stare. Some looked uncomfortable, some looked curious. No one spoke. The violin continued to play behind me, cheerful and cruel at the same time. By the time I reached the gate, my hands were trembling, but my face remained calm. The driver was still waiting by the car. He looked at me, confused. "Did something go wrong, ma'am?" he asked gently. I sat down slowly and closed the door. "No," I said after a moment. "I simply remembered something important." The drive home was quiet. The desert road stretched endlessly in front of us, the sun beginning to sink lower in the sky. The beautiful dress I had chosen now felt like a costume. I stared out the window and felt the weight in my chest grow heavier, not sharp, but deep and exhausting. I thought about the first time I held Thomas as a baby, about the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, about the years after my husband died, when I worked longer hours so my son would never feel the absence of his father in his life. I wondered when love had turned into entitlement. When I reached my house, the silence inside was overwhelming. I stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping in. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each sound landing like an accusation. I walked into my bedroom and took off the dress. I folded it carefully at first, then stopped and let it fall to the floor. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it, feeling something shift inside me. On the dresser was a framed photo of my husband. He was smiling the way he always did when he thought everything was under control. I looked at his face and felt tears finally burn my eyes. "You would never have allowed this," I whispered. But he was gone, and I was still here. I could have called a friend. I could have cried until I fell asleep. I could have told myself that this was just one bad moment. Instead, I walked into the small office at the back of the house, the one I had not used in years. I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder, labeled with the wedding date. My hands stopped shaking the moment I touched it. As I sat down and opened the folder, surrounded by contracts, invoices, and receipts with my name printed clearly at the top, I realized something that made my breath slow and steady. The woman who left the house that morning had been hoping to belong. The woman who came home that night was done asking for permission. And that was the moment everything began to change. I sat at my desk, long after the sun disappeared. The house, lit only by a small lamp, and the quiet certainty growing inside me. The folder lay open in front of me, page after page of proof, contracts signed in my handwriting, wire confirmations from my bank account, vendor agreements listing me as the sole client and financial guarantor. The venue, the catering, the music, even the chairs they would sit on. Every line pointed back to me. For the first time that night, I smiled, not because I felt victorious, but because clarity had finally replaced confusion. They had treated me like I was invisible, but on paper, I was unmistakable. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. It rang only once. "Evelyn," a familiar voice answered. "I was just thinking about you." His name was Harold Bennett. He had been my legal advisor since the year my husband passed away. The man who helped me navigate probate, contracts, and the difficult transition from grief to responsibility. "Harold," I said calmly, "I need to see you tomorrow morning. I have something important." "Is this about the wedding?" he asked, already sensing the weight in my voice. "Yes," I replied. "I was just removed from it." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Come in first thing. Bring everything." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My chest still hurt, but it was different now. Focused, directed. I stood and walked to the hallway closet, pulling out a small metal safe tucked behind old coats and winter scarves. Inside were documents I had not touched in a long time. Property deeds, titles, insurance policies, investment summaries. I spread them across the desk, beside the wedding folder. The house Thomas and Lauren lived in, my name. The vacation property they called their getaway, my name. The vehicle Thomas drove every day, the one he bragged about to friends, registered to me through an old business arrangement. Even the monthly transfers I sent, without fail. All voluntary, all reversible. I realized then that the wedding was not the betrayal. It was the reveal. They never planned to include me. They had planned to use me. Memories began lining up in my mind, moments I had dismissed as harmless. Lauren telling me not to worry about online banking because it was too complicated. Thomas waving off my advice about finances with a smile that said outdated. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. What they did not know was that after my husband died, I had kept his business running for 11 years. I negotiated contracts, I handled disputes, I made decisions that kept dozens of people employed. I did not survive that chapter by being foolish. I survived by being observant. I gathered the documents into neat stacks and placed them back in the safe. leaving only the wedding folder on my desk. Tomorrow, Harold would confirm what I already knew. I was not powerless. I had simply been patient, and patience, when it finally runs out, becomes something far more dangerous than anger. That night, I slept for the first time since the wedding. Not because the pain was gone, but because I finally understood where I stood, and where they soon would not. By the time Thomas and his family boarded their flight for their honeymoon, I was already 3 steps ahead of them. They left Arizona smiling, posting photos, champagne glasses raised, believing the worst was over. To them, the wedding drama was finished. I was the problem they had pushed out of the frame. An uncomfortable detail they assumed would fade with distance. They were wrong. The morning after the wedding, I sat across from Harold in his office. Sunlight poured through the window as he reviewed the documents slowly, carefully. He did not interrupt. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at me with an expression I had not seen in years. "Evelyn," he said, "everything here is very clear. You are the legal owner of the event. The properties, the vehicle, the funds, all of it." I nodded. I already knew. "What do you want to do?" he asked. For a moment, I thought about revenge. About public apologies. About making them feel the same humiliation I had endured. Then I shook my head. "No scenes," I said. "No shouting. I want this done properly. Quietly. By the book." Harold smiled faintly. "That is usually the most effective way." That afternoon, I began making changes. First, I stopped the monthly transfer to Thomas, the one he and Lauren relied on, but never acknowledged. With a few taps on my phone, the scheduled payment disappeared. No warning, no explanation. Second, I authorized Harold to prepare a formal notice regarding the house. Nothing aggressive, just a clear statement of ownership and a timeline that followed the law precisely. They would have time to adjust, but not forever. Third, I arranged for the vehicle to be flagged in the system as privately owned and restricted. No confrontation, just paperwork. While those steps were set in motion, I turned my attention inward. I booked an appointment at a salon I had walked past for years, but never entered. I cut my hair shorter than Thomas liked, lighter than Lauren ever approved of. When I looked in the mirror afterward, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked alert, awake. I enrolled in a local technology course. Basic financial software, digital security, online banking. Things I had been told were beyond me. Within days, I realized how deliberately I had been underestimated. Each night, I reviewed my finances, transferring assets into accounts only I could access. I did not drain everything. I was not reckless. I was strategic. While they wandered foreign streets believing their lives were unchanged, I was rebuilding mine piece by piece. On the 7th day of their honeymoon, my phone buzzed with a message. "Mum," Thomas wrote. "Just checking in. Everything okay?" I stared at the screen for a long moment. Not a single word about the wedding. Not an apology. Not even a question about my health. Just concern for the pipeline. I did not reply. I placed the phone face down and continued organizing my files. Silence, I was learning, was not weakness. It was preparation. And by the time they returned home, the life they thought was waiting for them would already be gone. The first sign of trouble came quietly. It was not a confrontation. It was not anger. It was confusion. On the 9th day of their honeymoon, Thomas called again. This time, his voice was different, tighter, controlled, but strained. "Mum," he said, "are you feeling all right?" I almost laughed. "Almost. I'm fine," I replied. "Why do you ask?" There was a pause. Then he cleared his throat. "The transfer didn't come through this month. The bank said there was no error on their end." I pictured him standing somewhere far away, probably in a hotel lobby, trying to sound reasonable while panic crept up his spine. I didn't say anything. "Mum?" he pressed. "Lauren is worried. We just wanted to make sure nothing happened." "Nothing happened," I said calmly. "I made a decision." His voice sharpened. "What decision?" Before I could answer, Lauren's voice broke through in the background, sharp and impatient. "Just ask her if she stopped the money." I closed my eyes for a moment. Then I spoke. "Yes, I stopped it." The line went silent. "You what?" Thomas finally said. "I stopped sending money," I repeated. "I need it now." "That doesn't make sense," he said quickly. "You don't have expenses like we do. This is just temporary, right?" "Temporary is how it started," I replied. "Permanent is how it ends." Lauren grabbed the phone. "Evelyn, listen to me. This is not the time for games. We're married now. Things are expensive. You can't just pull support without warning." I felt something settle in my chest. A calm I had not felt in years. "You're right, Lauren," I said. "I can pull it without warning, because it was never support. It was a favor." Thomas's voice returned, lower now. "Is this about the wedding?" I let the question hang. "That was a misunderstanding, Mom. You know that." Things were hectic, emotions were high. "A misunderstanding," I repeated. "You looked at me and said I wasn't welcome, in front of everyone." "That was not confusion, that was a choice." He exhaled sharply. "You're overreacting." "No, Thomas. I'm reacting accurately." His tone shifted. Defensive, threatening. "You can't do this. That house we live in, the car, you wouldn't actually take those away." I smiled, though he could not see it. "I already have." Lauren gasped. "What do you mean you already have?" "I mean the paperwork is filed, legally, calmly, correctly. You will receive notices when you return." Thomas raised his voice. "You're being irrational. You're letting your emotions control you." That's when I told him the part they never expected. "Yesterday, I completed a full medical and cognitive evaluation," I said evenly. "Conducted by a licensed specialist. 8 pages long. It confirms I am fully competent." Silence. "I sent a copy to my attorney this morning," I continued. "So, if you are considering questioning my mental state, I suggest you reconsider." Lauren started crying. Thomas started bargaining. "Mom, please. Let's talk when we get back. We can fix this." I looked at the phone, feeling no anger, only clarity. "You already fixed it," I said. "You fixed it the moment you decided I no longer mattered." I ended the call, and for the first time since that day at the wedding gate, I felt something close to relief, because now they knew, and there was no way back. They returned 3 days later. I did not go to the airport. I did not wait by the phone. I spent that morning doing ordinary things. I watered the plants. I folded laundry. I drank my coffee slowly, the way my husband used to when he wanted to think. At 6:42 p.m., my phone rang. "Mom," Thomas said without greeting. "We're home." I could hear the strain in his voice. Exhaustion. Fear. Something close to disbelief. "Good," I replied. "You should read the notice on the door." There was a pause. Then a sharp breath. "What is this, Evelyn? An eviction notice? Are you serious?" "Yes," I said calmly. 30 days. Exactly as the law requires." Lauren's voice burst through, high and panicked. "You can't do this. We have nowhere to go." "You had somewhere to go," I replied. "You chose not to include me there." Thomas's tone changed. He tried anger first, then logic, then guilt. He reminded me of sacrifices, of family, of everything I had already given. I listened without interrupting. When he finally ran out of words, I spoke. "I am not taking anything that belongs to you," I said. "I am taking back what belongs to me. There is a difference." They showed up at my building the next day. I saw them from the window before they rang the bell. Thomas pacing. Lauren clutching her phone. Eyes darting like she was looking for witnesses. I did not open the door. I spoke through the intercom. "This is not the place for this conversation," I said. "Please leave." Thomas lost his temper. He shouted, accused me of cruelty, of abandoning my own child. I waited until he stopped. "Thomas," I said quietly, "you abandoned me first. I am simply accepting it." The doorman stepped forward. They left. Over the next few weeks, everything unfolded exactly as expected. The car was returned. Keys were handed over. The house emptied. No drama, no confrontation. Just the steady movement of consequences. Friends called with questions. Relatives whispered. I did not explain myself. I didn't need to. The truth did not require a performance. On the 30th day, I received an envelope with the final keys inside. No note, no apology. Just metal and silence. I held them in my hand and felt something lift. Not triumph. Closure. That evening, I sat alone in my living room and looked around. The space felt different. Lighter. As if it had been holding its breath for years and was finally allowed to exhale. I realized then that consequences do not need to be loud to be powerful. They only need to be real. And from that moment on, nothing in my life belonged to anyone else but me. When the door finally closed behind them, my life did not feel empty. It felt honest. For the first time in years, the quiet in my home was not heavy. It was clean. I woke up without anxiety, without waiting for the next request, the next emergency that somehow always required my money, but never my presence. I sold the house they had lived in within 2 weeks. The market was good and the timing was better. I did not keep the money sitting still. I invested it carefully, the way my husband and I once planned to do together. I also did something I had postponed for far too long. I invested in myself. I continued my technology classes. I learned how to track my assets, protect my accounts, and make decisions without anyone else's permission. I joined a local community group for women my age who had spent decades giving and almost no time receiving. For the first time, I was not the caretaker in the room. I was simply Evelyn. There were moments of sadness. I would be lying if I said there were not. Some nights, I thought about the boy Thomas once was, the child who used to run into my arms after school. I mourned that version of him, not the man he became. He never apologized. Lauren never reached out. And that told me everything I needed to know. 3 months later, my grandson Daniel called. His voice was hesitant, polite, careful. "Grandma," he said. I didn't know what to say before. I didn't understand everything then. I listened. He told me his marriage was already strained, that the celebration they worked so hard to protect had not fixed anything underneath. That money had always been the glue, and once it was gone, everything else fell apart. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. I told him I loved him. I told him I hoped he would learn sooner than I had. And I told him something I wish someone had told me years ago. Love without respect is not love, it is a transaction. After that call, I sat by the window and watched the sun lower itself behind the desert horizon. I thought about the woman I had been at the wedding gate, standing there, hopeful, believing kindness would protect me. It did not. What protected me was the moment I chose myself. We spend so much of our lives teaching our children how to stand on their own, yet we forget to teach ourselves when to stop holding them up. There is a difference between support and surrender, between generosity and self-erasure. I did not lose my family that day. I lost the illusion that being needed was the same as being loved. And in losing that illusion, I gained something far more valuable: my dignity, my peace, my future. If there is one lesson my story leaves behind, it is this. Age does not make you powerless. Silence does. And the moment you decide you are done being invisible is the moment your real life begins. That was not the end of my story. It was the first chapter I finally wrote for myself.